Kia ora koutou and welcome. My name is Marek Tesar and I'm chairing the RECE steering committee, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to our third and final Reconceptualizing Early Childhood Education RECE 30th anniversary webinar titled Why RECE Still Matters. First of all, I would like to acknowledge all the Indigenous people on whose land we are connecting today to this webinar. We also want to acknowledge all teachers, families, and children who are affected by the pandemic around the world, many of whom are really struggling during the current Omicron outbreaks and lockdowns. This webinar is organized and sponsored by RECE, the Reconceptualizing Early Childhood Education organization, which is focused on a critical approach to early childhood education, theories, and childhood studies. RECE is a broad and welcoming international organization, and on behalf of the RECE steering committee, I would like to welcome you all to join us by visiting our website, receinternational.org, and becoming active members. 30 plus 1 year ago, RECE started, and we have had many years of amazing face-to-face international engagement, where we have discussed and collaborated on ideas related to reconceptualizing scholarship and activism in the early years. And as such, we are very excited to let you know that our 2022 hybrid RECE conference at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada, is all set to go ahead from June 23rd to June 26th. The title of the conference is Being Together in With Place, Reimagining Pedagogies in Transformational Times. What a great conference theme. We do hope that our RECE community will come together to reaffirm the sense of community, agency, creativity, and commitment to co-creating a more livable, equitable, just, caring, and welcoming world for children, families, and early childhood educators around the globe. We greatly look forward to seeing everyone in person or online in June 2022. The call for papers is on our website, and the deadline is 15th of February, but please know that there will be no extensions to the call. I guess that apart from RECE having a hybrid conference, not extending the call will be another RECE first this year. Last year, we started the 30th anniversary webinar series with a wish that they should help us to reach 300 members. Please join us. It's not too late to meet this ambitious aspirational goal and support our community. Click on our website and join. It's easy, not too expensive, and we'll be delighted to work together with you and to continue 30 plus years of work to reconceptualize early childhood education. For today's webinar, I'm deeply grateful to Bobbi Zaman for communication about and promotion of this event, and the School of Social Transformation at Arizona State University for the technical support of this event, especially the event coordinator, Lex Kirkpatrick. But now, it's my great privilege to acknowledge and deeply thank the organizer and moderator of today's webinar, Beth Swadener. Beth is Professor of Justice Studies and Social and Cultural Pedagogy in the School of Social Transformation at Arizona State University. Her research focuses on critical childhood studies, international comparative social policy with focus on sub-Saharan Africa, children's rights, and disability studies. I don't think Beth needs any further introduction. We all know all her books and publications, and she published over 14 of them, including Children and Families at Promise, Does the Village Still Raise the Child, Decolonizing Research in Cross-Cultural Contexts, Reconceptualizing Early Childhood Education, a Care, a Reader, Education for Social Justice in Early Childhood, and more recently, the Routledge International Handbook on Young Children's Rights. Beth is a co-founder of Reconceptualizing Early Childhood Education 30 years ago, and she also founded other organizations such as, and I know they are very close to her heart, Local to Global Justice, the Girani Project, and Friends of the Girl Child Network. And while for Beth, this may be the last year of faculty teaching, we know this is not the last year of RECE for her. Name Hinui and Beth, over to you to introduce us to today's 30th anniversary webinar's theme and speakers. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, and welcome to this third webinar in our series that celebrates 30 years, now 30 years plus, of RECE. Dating back to our first conference in 1991. I'm so delighted for this opportunity to engage with a panel that we've selected to be at different places from different theoretical standpoints and doing different work that is all informed by a reconceptualist set of lenses and tools and theories. So what I'll be doing is introducing everyone, and then they will have 2 or 3 minutes to describe sort of the roles of reconceptualist work in their scholarship and pedagogy. I wanted to make one more acknowledgement that, you know, the panel does not allow today for us to have all of the co-founders, and I particularly wanted to name some of the other people who were struggling to find a venue for ideas that were pushing back on the dominant narratives in early childhood of developmentalism and other deficit terms and so forth. And they include, of course, Shirley Kessler, Janice Gibson, Joe Tobin, who we did invite and couldn't join us today, and also Daniel Walsh at University of Illinois. And parallel to that, of course, were earlier work done from the 70s into the 80s of scholars of the sociology of childhood and authors around the globe who have happily joined with us and us with them, if you will. Not an us and them dichotomy, don't quote me on that. But we have joined for a wonderful recurring gathering, usually, you know, just all over the world. I was going to say, you know, alternating between countries. So without further ado, but to acknowledge others who are co-founders along with Mimi, Jonathan, and myself, we'll be starting today with Mimi, Marianne or Mimi Bloch, who is Professor Emerita at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And she co-hosted RECE in 1991, again in 96, and again in 2005. And if we were in person about this time, I'd say raise your hand if you, you know, attended more than so many of these. But we'll have an opportunity to raise hands when we transition to the Q&A later. When I came to know her, she was doing work in Senegal and in West Africa more generally. And she has worked, as you all know, bringing feminist and post-structural theories to our field. She has co-edited volumes, including recently Reconceptualizing Early Childhood Education and Care, a reader. She also is the editor of our RECE-linked journal, International Critical Childhood Studies, that hopefully many of you have sent or will send manuscripts to. We together edit a series for Palgrave called Critical Cultural Studies of Childhood. So welcome, Mimi. Turning to Dana, who is full-time in the classroom and an assistant professor. And has 3 children. She didn't put that in her bio, so maybe it's inappropriate of me, but I think of Dana as a remarkable colleague and professional friend who balances many roles, and even now 2 substitute teachers, pray for them, are covering her early childhood classroom so she could take the time to be part of the panel. So she's a teacher scholar. She teaches pre-kindergarten at Buckingham, Brown, and Nichols School in Cambridge, and is also assistant professor, as I mentioned, in early childhood at Lesley University. Her work focuses on rethinking and reimagining creativity, voice, social justice, and anti-bias issues with young children. Many of you know her work. She's published many articles and has co-edited the recent volume with Nicola Yelland, Found in Translation, love that title, Connecting Reconceptualist Thinking with Early Childhood Practices. So welcome, Dana, and we hope your subs are doing fine. Okay, we'll move on then to Jonathan Silin, who we're not entirely a US-based panel today. He comes to us from Toronto, Canada. He's an early childhood scholar who was on the faculty at Bank Street College for many years and remains editor of the Occasional Papers series, in fact, for the last 18 years. And so many of us have benefited from your writing and from your editorial work and mentorship of us and other colleagues. He's currently a fellow at the Center for Sexual Diversity Studies in Toronto and has edited and authored 4 books. And just someone that I think many of us who know you, know your work, think of as a strong voice, not only for the RECE steering committee and our organization, but as providing a foundation for many of us to think about work with children, and always an inspiring speaker when we hear you like today. Okay, no pressure there, Jonathan. Moving on to a newer colleague who is not at all new to childhood studies, as a former Head Start teacher and is finishing a PhD. I'm referring to Bobbi, Zaman. They are PhD candidate at Portland State University in the School of Social Work. Their research focuses on critical youth and childhood studies, particularly focused on queering developmentalist narratives and working with queer and trans youth of color through anarchy. I love this because some of you know I embrace the idea that RECE has anarchist roots very deeply. Anarchy expressed through digital art and performance. Their dissertation explores embodied feelings of self-identified furries, F-U-R-R-I-E-S, if you're not so familiar, furries of color using personas to unsettle fixed identities. He is a volunteer right now, a valuable volunteer, I could use both words, with RECE, and is working as Marek acknowledged in outreach and communication. So thank you so much for bringing your work today. And then last, but certainly not least, and someone I work with rather closely, we're both at ASU, I want to introduce Dr. Janna Goebel, who is Assistant Professor of Sustainability and Education, a job title that some of us who know her work think was created just for her, as you'll see. She is also a Senior Global Future Scientist at Arizona State. Her work explores childhoods and learning in the Anthropocene, and her dissertation was based on living and working with families of a multi-generation, 5 generations, on a coffee plantation in southeastern Brazil, where she sought to understand connections between learning from the more than human world and used story worlding and other symbolic storytelling to convey her findings in, I thought, just a beautiful way. No bias here on her committee, not her chair. Okay, Janna is active in RECE also and supported our earlier webinars that we began when we were unable to go to Palestine for our planned in-person conference in fall of 2020. So I will turn it over now to each of our panelists in that order to share up to 3 minutes again of how RECE has impacted their scholarship as well as pedagogy. Thank you.
I think I go. Okay, so there will be other questions later, but that I will address. But first, I wanted to thank Beth, Mark, Janna, Bobbi, everybody, and those on the steering committee for allowing us to have the celebration of RECE for the 30th year, and to honor especially Beth Swadener, who's a colleague and friend who will be retiring from ASU this year, sadly for many students of hers currently, but she's been fantastic. I can't even enumerate the number of students she's had that she's mentored over all these years, but they've been very, very lucky. So I'll just start with a celebration of Beth and all her contributions, past, current, and to come still. So I'd like to also say then thank you to everybody else, and it's an honor to be here after, and a privilege to be here after 30 years. Some of our colleagues that started this group are no longer with us. But I will just say again that RECE still matters to me. It has been a primary community for many, many scholars and practitioners. But as a family, we've shared laughter and our work, our new ideas, and maybe political commitments over a long time. Over 30 years of RECE, for me, it has been my home base, with a lifetime of relationships made and wonderful colleagues I've met and often worked with. A lot of fun at conferences, seeing those from many, many countries of the world, going to different preschools around the world, which I always love to do, and still working with many people that I met during a period of 30 years. So I've been very, very lucky, and I have personal relationships with so many. And I hope a few of you are here. I won't mention you, but I think some of you are. So it still matters to me, of course. But as an organization, RECE has strived to be as democratic as possible, aspiring, not always achieving, inclusiveness, having many diverse ideas, and having an aspiration for diversity in its membership. It has also aspired to represent or include ideas and advocate for ideas and new practices that are often on the margins, but are still very much still critically important. Some of the ideas from the past are still critically important. Many emerging ideas are still left to have for us to fight and talk about and work on. So yes, the initial group, as Beth suggested, included Beth Blue Swadener, Shirley Kessler, Jan Gibson, Gary Price, Beth Grell, Daniel Walsh, Bud Spodek, Joe Tobin, Sally Lubeck, Becky New, later Valerie Polikow, Bill Ayers, Amos Hatch, David Fernie, Rebecca Cantor, and Jonathan Silin were among the first founding members of the group. And then there were graduate students, Chelsea Bailey, Gail Bolt, and others were in that emerging group of scholars that we hope to mentor and bring into the group. We were all early childhood researchers who were also, to a great extent, called critical theorists, or identifying with critical theory. We focused on policy, research, pedagogy, and curriculum. We drew from the reconceptualists, curriculum theorists who included Bill Pinar, Janet Miller, Michael Apple, to name just a few, and also sociologists of childhood, including Chris Jenks and Gunilla Dahlberg, who's still in the RECE group. Feminist and class-based theory, I drew from Miriam David's work from my early years. Critical perspectives on psychology and child development, Erica Berman, Valerie Walkerdine, and Valerie Polikow, who are still part of what we consider the larger RECE group, although they may not identify always with RECE. The founding group of RECE focused on curriculum theory, and I draw from a very recent email from Shirley Kessler. She said, "The conferences have helped me to analyze the importance of critical theory in curriculum development. Critical theory begins from an ethical position, claiming that social processes, including educational, are inherently unjust, resulting in the creation of a permanent underclass." The founding group all had anthropology, cross-cultural, or multicultural education backgrounds. We questioned normal child development, and we're still questioning that, and drew from our international and cross-cultural experiences that many of us had to originally critique the DAP document for its sort of unique, the universal child development concept. While that has changed over time, we are still drawing on critiques of that more homogeneous and less diverse concept of what is a normal child, normal family, normal childhood. The first RECE conference is also focused on the dominance of quantitative or positivist research in early childhood education. Most of us were doing qualitative, and now many are doing post-qualitative work. And we tried to focus on, could we find a venue and publication sources for the work that we were doing? And in the 1991 or so, we were finding that difficult. And the RECE conference originated from many of our critiques, but also the need to talk to each other and to sort of stimulate each other, mentor each other, and to also begin to find ways to publish together. And so I think maybe that's the end of my time for right now, but I'll come back in later. I just wanted to say that it's an honor to be here today, and look forward to also especially everybody's comments, both from the audience and the younger panelists here. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So I think I'm up next. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me as a part of this panel. I'm honored and very nervous to share this moment with these incredible scholars and to be a part of the RECE community. My name is Dana France Bentley, and I am a pre-K, pre-kindergarten teacher in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I also have a very part-time gig as an assistant professor at Lesley University. I've been in the classroom with young children for almost 20 years, and that space just continues to be the central driving story of my life. Before joining you today, I was faced with a list of formidable questions regarding RECE's role in the world, all held together by the overarching query, does RECE still matter? Now, while my answer was an emphatic yes, the asking of the question demanded something. It demanded that I look into my everyday and wonder why this community and its questions matter in the life of the pre-K classroom. And for me, in order to matter, RECE has to be ordinary. It has to live in those everyday moments of small hands, snack eating, block building, and circle time. RECE's voice in the ordinary is how it is articulated each day in the lives of children and teachers. And for me, the relevance of RECE is about playing with sticks. I'll have to make a quick visit to my classroom just to explain and sort of bring you into that moment. It was a bitter cold day in Massachusetts, with everything that those first truly frigid days of winter bring in a pre-K classroom. We were in the park having the kinds of adventures that city kids have when set loose among logs, ice, leaves, dirt, and unstructured play space. In these moments, I'm always hyper aware of the feeling of being watched by those around us and the rules of what play should look like versus the reality. On this day, there was a giant stick, a truly epic stick, one of those sticks that simply demand to be played with. I watched as Eric leaned down with bravado and tried to heft the stick into his arms, narrowly missing Amy and Paul, who were playing nearby. All eyes of the other adults in the area turned towards them and then me. All eyes spoke the words, "No, sticks are not for playing. A good teacher would say no." And my whole body strained towards no, toward the "that's not safe" cry of the good teacher. But this was a good day. On this day, I breathed in hard through my mask and I waited. I breathed in through the concerned surveillance and I watched. Eric jumped back quickly to avoid hitting Amy and Paul. "Sorry," he shouted. "It's okay," they replied with ease. Eric, hands on hips, walked the length of the stick, surveying and assessing. "Hey guys," he called, "I need more people. Cameron, Sarah, can you help?" The other children raced across the park, drawn by his charisma and the seduction of the stick. What ensued was a complex negotiation of placement, direction, and order. The kids' heads tucked together in the seriousness of real work, their murmurings muffled by their masks. I stood apart, keeping them in my eyesight, but giving them space. There's nothing like a teacher's help to ruin possibly illicit fun. Within moments, the plan was orchestrated and in process. The three hefted the enormous branch into the air and began to navigate the play space. Cries of "higher," "lower," and "watch out" rang between them as they negotiated their classmates, the rocks, and the trees. The branch traveled the length of the park and was carefully balanced against a wall. Finally, the three stood back to survey their work. "It's a fort," Sarah declared, and the idea ignited across the space. Suddenly, sticks, rocks, and leaves were being transported, and one branch became a place, a movement, a new adventure. And this is what RECE means to me in the snow-suited, stick-filled, boundary-pushing cadences of the early childhood classroom. It's about sticks and whether or not they have the chance to become forts. It's the moment between no and what might be if I waited. It's the space between this is how it's done and what it might be. And so, yes, RECE still matters every single day. It's in the possibility of us as a class being different, being new, finding our story in resistance rather than compliance to what always is, what always has been. RECE is the faith and defiance of playing with sticks and wandering toward unimagined futures. And to close, I just wanted to show a picture of these guys playing with this ginormous stick because it really was kind of amazing. Hold on one second. And this is them. And I have the honor of passing this on to Jonathan Silin. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Dana. I'm entranced by the story. And thank you for telling it so much. And thank you also, Beth, for that lovely introduction. I will add that I stepped down from editorship of Occasional Papers a couple of years ago, after 18 years, and Gail Bolt stepped up and is doing an absolutely fantastic job, as so many of us know. So thank you, Gail. In my 3 minutes, I wanted to identify 3 elements that laid the groundwork or prepared the soil for RECE. Because RECE did not spring de novo. Those of us who were there at the beginning entered the field in the 1960s and 70s against a common backdrop. And I want to name 3 of these elements. The first, in the 1950s, was the growing body of research stressing the importance of early childhood for later learning and growth. And there emerged research about the plasticity of the human brain, suggesting that our school careers are not predetermined at or by birth, but are much affected by early environments and experiences. The second element that I wanted to identify was the 1960s civil rights movement, the focus on social justice and the extent of injustice in our society. For early childhood people especially, the war on poverty led to the tremendous expansion of early childhood programs throughout the country through projects like Head Start and Project Follow Through. In fact, without the first Head Start project in the summer of 1965, when it was only a summer program, I would in fact never have entered the field. So I'm ever indebted to that. The third element that I wanted to identify was a series of cultural, what I'm calling cultural shifts in the 1970s. And of course, none of these happened by decade. I'm just using that as a handle, but certainly this started prior to the 70s. I'm talking about the growth of feminism. I'm talking about what we called the gay liberation movement in the 70s and the loose bag of things that we would call counterculture. All of these conflicts, all of these contexts influenced how I and others taught and thought about children long before RECE came into being. Our commitments were different from a prior generation of educators. I think we were more activist, more willing to question assumptions, and less willing to settle for what had been. In the late 70s and the early 80s, some of us were already questioning the basic tenets of developmental theory before it was codified in the 1986 RECE document. For myself, as a male in a predominantly female field, as a gay man in an era when homosexuality was identified with pedophilia, I was especially sensitive to the potentially harmful reliance on stage theories of development. As Mimi indicated, for the way that they normalize development and pathologize many of us, if not most of us, the way that they limit what can be said and discussed with children, and the way that they map this huge terrain of what cannot be talked about with children. And third, the way that traditional developmental theory erased, ignored, negated the funds of knowledge, the cultural capital with which many kids entered school. So this point of view, which I carried with me into the job market in the early 80s, was not exactly a popular point of view. Interviewers said, well, who's going to teach Piaget if we hire you? Who's going to teach X and Y? And it was hard to find a job. I left the field at that point for a decade, in part because of not being able to find a job, in part because of the urgent call and demands of the escalating AIDS crisis, where I was to find a home. So I'll stop there for the moment and pass the baton over to Bobbi, and I'll come back with some more later on.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you everybody for letting me be here. It's been such an honor to spend so much time with all of you recently. As Beth has already noted, I'm a doctoral student, and so my relationship with RECE is different than I think what we heard so far. I feel like, you know, a lot of you have lived, a lot of you that I see here, and a lot of you that I heard of live in text, if that makes sense. And so when I have met all of you, it's been great, but also, you know, as an early educator, you know, I think I've almost left the field a couple of times as an educator because of being a queer person of color, and like also like being kind of like shown only this kind of like, you know, this dominant text for so long. But RECE kind of crept into me in some odd way that, you know, someone just lent me these texts, you know, like in passing, if that makes sense. And since then, they have, you know, really, for me at least, ignited a fire of like, I think the spirit of RECE from its beginning, like of resistance in some way, which I did not think was possible in this field. And for so long, I, you know, kind of wandered my classroom or wandered the halls, thinking about what is possible. I think RECE has opened the door to, I think, what Jose Munoz talks about is like beyond the here and now. And so I'm always thinking about beyond the here and now. And does it still matter? Do these things still matter? I think, again, to go kind of like, you know, go beyond that and just think about, you know, it's always igniting something. And I think it's, the, you know, it's text that, at least for me, is accessible and intriguing. And for the educator who may not have the time to look over such, you know, intense theories, RECE has been this really, beautiful home for a lot of us. And I think for me, at least, somebody who their mind is in these alternative ways of knowing, or even just thinking about mess or anarchism, RECE is a gateway to that. But, you know, I often look to RECE now and think about, you know, not an absence, but a kind of like strange echo when I write or when I think about RECE, you know, this kind of silence when it comes from people of color or queer people of color within the field. And so I hope to, you know, not critique RECE, but to think about what it comes next. What are its possibilities? What are its future potentialities? And to think similarly, like queer studies, you know, is there a room for a queer of color critique, or critiques that are going to not stifle it, but extend it beyond to, I think, a future that could be more beautiful, more engaging, and so forth. So I sit there, and I've recently have an article that I co-authored with Ben Anderson-Nathy that goes into the history of RECE, but also a potential bridging and how can we look at queer and developmentalism and the kind of like the root of resistance when it comes to RECE and so forth. So I'll go more into that later, but I don't want to take up too much time. And I'll pass it on to Janna, who is next.
Thanks, Bobbi. I remember when Bobbi reached out to be more involved in RECE, and everything you said today reminds me of that moment and just how you went for it. You were looking for community and you're making the community, and that's why RECE still matters today, because people like you are doing that. So thank you. So my name is Janna Goebel, and I am Assistant Professor of Sustainability Education and Senior Global Future Scientist. And I say that because when I was 8, I wanted to work with dolphins. And I spoke with a marine biologist who told me I had a better chance of becoming a football player than working with dolphins in that capacity. And so I learned from a young age that science spaces weren't made for me. And so I'm not a hard scientist. I am actually what Mimi would have said was the post-qualitative here in this group, but I hold space with that title for people to see themselves reflected in scientists that are doing that kind of work too. Why RECE matters to me is going to sound a lot like a love letter about why Beth matters to me. So I will come full circle with what Mimi said, but I wouldn't be in this position if not for Beth and not for RECE. And so I'll just tell the story of how I joined RECE, and then we can move on to other things. So I had just gotten back from Brazil in 2019, and my experience before this had been in higher education and student mobility. And I was talking with my advisor, brilliant mentor, Iveta Silva, and I was telling all of these stories about children. And she said, I think that you want to explore this further, but I feel like an imposter because I don't have early childhood education experience except for my own lived experiences and being a nanny for a year. And so I felt like I didn't know where to go. And she suggested I reach out to Beth, and I had an informational interview with Beth where I just wanted to get to know her. And I ended the meeting by asking her to be on my committee because I just couldn't see a path forward without her. She's a wonderful and supportive mentor, and she works really hard to bring people into spaces. Most recently, I'm in a writing support group with her, and she's brought in one of my current students. So it's just this beautiful community that Beth creates. And so I didn't know about RECE until Beth invited me to apply. But at that time, I was really far behind on my deadlines. I had missed my funding application deadline, and I just couldn't see how I could make it to the conference in New Mexico. And Beth wouldn't take that as an answer, and she made sure I could be there. And so when I got there, I met all of you wonderful, beautiful people. And there's one moment that really stands out that I've said before in RECE spaces, but I'd just like to acknowledge it again. I was starting to play with some ideas, and they seemed almost silly to me. And I mentioned them to Andrew Gibbons, and he said, that's a beautiful idea. It will be a lovely contribution to the field. You should do it. And it was like someone who looks like people who told me I couldn't be in this space was telling me you belong in this space and you need to do this. And it wouldn't have happened if not for Beth inviting me and making it possible for me to be there. So since that time, I've been working with other colleagues. Another one I'd like to mention is Anu Sashdev. Our dissertations were similar, and she knows a lot more about RECE and everything everyone else has said. And we're working together with our dissertation data to reimagine it beyond kind of space and time. So we're looking at our 2 dissertations across space and time. And so I found this community that's so supportive, but I wouldn't have made it to this spot that I'm in today if not for Beth. And so RECE still matters, and Beth still matters very much to us, and will be dearly missed when she retires, but she'll still be so active. And so I hope that for those of us here that are just starting out in our careers, that we can take this model that these founders have made and look at it as relationships still matter, and that it's our job to continue this on because it does still matter very much.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting one for my pending extended sabbatical to be announced at an international forum, but I think many of you know that already. And a little embarrassing. It's like, oh, did you put together a panel to get feedback? But moving along, the format now is going to be less linear and sequential, which we in RECE critique all the time, and more, I'll just be posing 3 broad questions, and it'll be a free and open discussion that will open even further in about 25 minutes or so when we transition to everyone being able to raise questions and have input. So going along with the 30 years, the first question is just, how did we get here? Sounds like a line from a Talking Heads song or something, but how did we get to this point? And also, how did each of you or whoever chooses to engage with this question come to RECE? Some of you have already mentioned that. I think Bobbi spoke to that in particular, sort of how he found RECE. But how did we get here, and how did some of you come to RECE? Seek it out, help create it, whatever that means to you. So the floor is open for that question.
I can chime in a bit, continuing on sort of this theme of the before time, that is the before RECE. Mimi mentioned this, but I think that the Bergamo conference, the Reconceptualizing and Curriculum Theory Conference, was a critical place for many of us to meet and get to know people like Bill Pinar, Madeline Grumet, Joanne Pagano, endless numbers of people who are rethinking curriculum, and they inform so much of our thinking. When I did return to the field in 1992, after a decade of AIDS work, 2 colleagues of mine at Bank Street, Harriet Cafaro and Steve Schultz, were planning to attend the RECE conference in Chicago. And they urged me to come. They knew this would be a match. They urged me to come, and I did. And I would say that at RECE, one thing that struck me, and the reason it was a good match, was that I found there a group of people who were eager to explore how disciplines other than child development might empower our thinking about children and childhood. And we hoped, all of us, I think, to imagine an early childhood world that was permeable to a range of disciplines. And after all, many of us had been reading, thinking along with the Frankfurt School of critical theorists, with French deconstructionists, with phenomenologists of all stripes, and especially with the work of Michel Foucault in the 70s and 80s. So for me, it was immediately a very sympathetic group where I thought, oh, this is a place where I can be, and this is a place where I can do the work that I want to do.
I think it's sort of an interesting question. When I was lucky enough to work with Janet Miller at Teachers College, and started before I ever came to RECE, had the opportunity to spend some time at Bergamo as well. And I remember having this feeling of, these people are doing this work, and where are my people? I hear all of this, but where are the people who, I know that they're thinking in similar ways, but where are the people who hold the sticky fingers in line on the way to the park? Where are the people who are, opening milk cartons and setting up rest mats? There've got to be. And simultaneously, I was lucky enough to work at the Rita Gold Early Childhood Center at Teachers College. And my mentor there, Susan Recchia, as well as many of the other teachers, said, you have to go to RECE. Those are your people. And I think it was an amazing experience being told, you're already a reconceptualist, you're already doing this with children, and then coming home to a home I had never known when I went to RECE for the very first time.
I agree with that sentiment entirely. I feel like when I experiment with ideas, I've never had to question whether or not that was okay or I was allowed. I always felt like, because of RECE and other mentors, that I was able to play with ideas and that I would be able to move forward with them. And in RECE in New Mexico, I met a group of scholars, and we've continued in a writing support group with each other about once a month on Fridays. And so we refer to ourselves as next gen or something, RECE next gen sometimes. But that's exactly it, Dana, that we have a family, a space where we can be play with ideas and push each other's thinking. And I think that's really important.
Really quickly, I just want to know, I wanted to bounce off really quick, just sort of from what Jonathan was saying. And you talk about like being influenced or hearing about Foucault. And I still think that's timely in some way. Like, I think I have only heard about Foucault in relation to early childhood through RECE's texts. And so when I was going through my degree program in PSU for child and family studies and education, people weren't really engaging with that, but RECE seemed to be this place of, what everyone's talking about here, community, this is my people. And so I want to reiterate that, as well as these histories and these feelings I think are super similar even now, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to add that, but thank you.
Go ahead, Mimi.
Yeah, I'll just add that in the early years, we had people picked up books that they heard about for the first time. I won't say that we were naive, but we were still very open to learning about things. And I remember Joe Tobin had a seminar at Hawaii, I think, where he taught at that time on Foucault, and then later another one on Deleuze and Guattari, if I remember correctly. And I did similar things in some of my classes in the late 80s and the early 90s. But coming back to another comment that one of you made, we had some other communities, but we did not have one that focused on young children. I think that was a critical piece, that we just felt we needed to have a community that had common concerns, but that was open to thinking differently, or diverse ideas, different theoretical frameworks, and asking a lot of questions that didn't seem to be even possible to ask. It seemed like that. I think that we developed RECE in those early days, and I'm ever grateful that we still have a community with young scholars, the next gen, that really are also finding new ideas, new, people your own age or older or whatever, or younger, that are exploring new ways to do things, to open up new spaces and new ideas, and also ask all the critical questions and push hard at all the things that still are so unjust and matter in this world. Thank you. Yeah.
And thank you, Mimi, for that transition, because what we're going to turn to next is sort of the state of the world, not so much over the past 30 years, although various advocacy projects have been taken up by many of us who have attempted to organize at conferences. And, with Matthias Urban and others, I remember the meeting in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and a number of us were speaking out about baby PISA and assessment. And Lacey Peters organized the press conference, and there were various issues we've taken up. But my question is in the here and now, but, where you can go anywhere in time or do a history of the present if you decide. I just want to pose the question about what you think are the most compelling advocacy or activist engagement sorts of issues facing the early childhood field, facing children, facing families, and the policy arena, and what could or should RECE be doing in this regard? So what might our advocacy agenda be locally, globally, individually, and collectively?
Recently, there were two papers published by the Bank Street Education Center, and they focus on the US, but I think they really have global implications. And they spoke to me and they spoke to a moment. One was in 2020, and the paper was called Equitable Compensation for the Childcare Workforce. And it reminded me, and I was sort of stunned, by this critical question. In the US, half of all childcare workforce relies on public assistance programs in order to eat. 86% make less than $15 an hour. Only 15% receive employer-sponsored health insurance. I just put those out there. There's lots of statistics, we know them. But I was struck that in the 1980s, one of the things that that turned me off about NAEYC was the program of career ladders and professionalization as an agenda, when I felt what they needed was a labor movement and unions and an attempt at really working at higher salaries, and that this sort of very middle class notion of how you improve was not what was needed. So, but I'm broad again and hearing several other kinds of reports about the status of compensation in the field. I'm just astounded and just profoundly disturbed. The other paper that the Bank Street Center published this last year, 2021, was called Establishing Early Childhood as a Public Good. And this reminds me of the potential that the pandemic has offered us for throwing a critical light on the role that quality care plays in allowing individual families to function and supporting a robust society altogether. And I think in many ways, people have been made aware of the role that having quality care plays. And this is a chance, I think, to seize that moment. And my hunch is that there's going to be considerable funding coming into the field in the US and in other places. But we need to be, I think, talking more about this, that the reason one invests in childcare is that it's a public good which benefits everyone, not just the particular families who happen to have young children at this moment in time. So those are two issues. I'm not saying, I'm not sure if these are RECE issues or not, but there's certainly big issues. They may be too big for us, but I'm putting out there on the table.
And it brings to mind our conference in Denmark a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 by now, but hearing those very statistics in conversation with a quite theorized paper, and it was a RECE moment for me. We're looking at the reality of the very marginalized labor that is done every day by people who do work like Dana and so many others directly with young children. And then it was so well theorized, but let's keep talking about what advocacy projects we might consider. Dana, go ahead.
I think that I want to be cognizant of the fact that for me, as I said in my piece, RECE really lives on my shoulder. It's something that's reminding me, whispering to me as a teacher all of the time. But I also want to be aware of the fact that I'm in a very privileged position to have access to the kind of thinking and work that's being done at RECE. And I really, when I think about advocacy, I really think about these everyday moments and how do we make this kind of support and thinking accessible to a broader range of the people who are providing education and care to young children around the world. Because I do feel like it's very unique that I have this, and the work that you all do shapes the work that I do every day. So how do we make this conversation an accessible one to more of the people who are working directly with children? And I do think, sort of connecting Jonathan and Mimi, what you were both saying, when we're finding our people, when we're looking for, there is this sense as a teacher somehow that we are less because we work with young children. And that teaching young children versus teaching high schoolers, or teaching, that somehow we get paid less. We are, and you take that into yourself. And COVID, I think, has created this heightened moment around, oh wait, our whole system doesn't function without these teachers. But I also think that moment is starting to trend downward. There was a lot of attention at the very beginning, and I'm wondering about how do we take this moment and not just work on what holes needed to be filled, but what have we thought about this profession and how do we reshape people's thinking about it? Because it is a weight to carry, both for children as well as teachers, to always be thought of as less because of being under the age of 8 or whatever it is that you want to designate as early childhood.
Essential, not expendable, as one childcare Facebook group out of Wisconsin has named it in part of what you're saying. Anyone else like to respond? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, from my very particular lens of sustainability, I lose sleep at night thinking about our children's futures and safety and their current injustices that are happening that may continue into the future. And so I see my work here at ASU as designing equitable futures that are safe and just. And I don't see how you can do that without co-designing those futures with children and youth. And so I'm thinking particularly of teen activists and how to make sure that all children's voices are heard and included, and that their expertise is included in designing the futures that they won't have it, that we will be long gone and they may be suffering for our decisions and our selfishness in this time. So I see that as part of the driving force behind my work. Something that inspires me to want to continue is to see how we can make sure that we are co-designing futures with children and youth.
Really quickly, I just want to add, like, not to take from the American Studies conference happening this year and their theme, but like the roof is literally on fire if you think about that. Like we're in these very interesting, precarious times, and RECE, has responded, I think, to at the beginning, those times, thinking about what is, the role to care for, educate children. Like, what is it? What does that mean in these current times of uncertainty? How do we move forward, I guess? And so I'm always curious about, I think, Janna, like, you really kind of sparked my interest in thinking about, like co-creating with youth, but also just showing youth, like, or how do we, I think one of the big things that has really inspired me with RECE is like returning autonomy to the child or to youth, and thinking about, maybe it's not our time at this very moment. How do we respond to, the roof is on fire, but how do we look to, I think, youth as not for answers, but also for new ways of being in this world that maybe we, I think I look to potentially the common worlds folks, who I think we may be familiar with, but also at the same time, even beyond that, looking to youth for how they would maybe interact with the world, and maybe us adults, or those of us who have, put gasoline on this fire, to step back, if that makes sense. And what would that look like? Maybe to admit to ourselves to those messes, if that makes sense. But yeah, just wanted to talk about that.
And we're meant just to kind of provide openings for conversation. And of course, these are beyond resolution in our short time. We're going to I will post the third question. And then to foreshadow what's happening, what's coming up, is that people who came in as panelists, and I think for some reason a link got shared or something happened, that many people came in my name with my link and have been posting right along. But for those of you who registered on Eventbrite and came in through the regular channels, we'll be migrating you right after this last discussion point to be panel members, so that everyone can post questions of particular panel members, or and then Mark and I will moderate that conclusion to this webinar. So my third question has to do with possibilities and future imaginaries. So what are possibilities and future imaginaries for RECE, including issues that we need to address? Bobbi and others before their comments have, and we've been painfully aware of some issues that, we're overrepresented in certain ways that are, evident today, that while global, we've had to take care to schedule things in time zones so that parts of the global south or Australia, Asia could actually realistically participate just in the practical and inclusion realms. But what other future imaginaries do you see for RECE as we begin another 30 years or however long we've got? Mimi, go right ahead.
I'd just like to tag on to the last discussion too, but also respond to your comment. I really feel that RECE, since I've been part of this for a long, long time, that we have such good diversity of ideas, very impactful ideas, but we have not found easy ways to make the impact that those ideas could have, or relationships with policymakers or child advocates. The relationships with teachers has been a long-standing aim of RECE, and Dana and Jonathan and everybody here, thank you for your work, your direct work and your examples. But we still have so much further to go, both in our relationships with, in the relationships and partnerships and collaborations with practitioners and advocating for the early childhood community, or with the early childhood community, for higher wages, for example, what Jonathan mentioned, and for better working conditions, which have been evident, and the long-standing, what's the right word? The essential but not expendable type of mentality that accompanies the idea of those whom we love, who work with young children, who the age group that we all think is so important around the world. But we have not found quite the right tools to advocate and move things forward. So I pass that on to the next group of people with RECE and beyond, not because I will be absent, but because your ideas are fantastic. And maybe you can come up with some new ways to move that momentum forward on some of these such important issues. Thank you. Yeah.
I think I very much support what's been said. To me, the two big issues are how can we reach out and be more welcoming to queer educators and educators of color? How can we become more of a home, or at least a great place to visit? So while I've myself personally felt professionally and personally welcomed and at ease and capable of talking about anything, I think that we could do a better job and be more proactive in engaging other queer educators and educators of color. So I think that's an agenda item for me. And just on what you've said, Mimi, I also think that we need to be smarter and more focused about what vehicles we use to reach what groups of people. So how do we amplify our voice in a group that is all volunteer, where everyone has, big careers, other careers? How can we be smart at targeting both an audience and a vehicle that's doable given RECE's resources? If we can do one small thing and do it well, I think that would be fantastic. So I would set a modest goal, but I'd be smart about it, as smart as we can be.
When we all first came together about this panel, I remember sharing that for me, the RECE conferences, they're sort of like the Isle of Avalon, kind of comes out of the mist and is this amazing sustaining experience, the ones that I'm able to attend. And I feel like I try to soak all of those moments up and they carry me. And what I'm wondering about when we're thinking about our future is how do we create more of those moments, more of those points of contact, and access more educators and practitioners to create that kind of sustenance over a long period of time. So not just my very first adventure in London, finding myself in this very unfamiliar space and then walking into all of you and finding myself home in a place I'd never been before. How do we then create that in an accessible way that lives throughout a year so that we're sustaining educators and connecting with educators in meaningful ways? I think that's what I wonder about for us. And how do we make, while taking a trip to New Zealand may not be possible for all teachers, how do we make some of those experiences available to academics as well as teachers in a long-term way? Because it changes my life every single time.
I agree with Dana there. I think it's all about engagement and how to ensure that we can have meaningful engagement. I'm not sure that my experience with RECE would have been the same if not going to New Mexico with Beth. And we had, what did you call it, about roadside kind of chats or something? I can't remember, mentoring.
Road trip mentoring.
Road trip mentoring.
We drove.
We drove together, and it's such a precious moment. But I don't know how I would have made the deep connections that I've made without that in-person conference that first year. And so I've been really interested in virtual engagement and like to compliment Bobbi for their work in this, growing the Twitter account and reaching out to people who we haven't invited in before. So I'd love to hear Bobbi conclude.
Yeah, really quick, I think it's, we talk a lot, or I've been hearing so far in here, like, how do we engage with people more? How do we make it more accessible? How do, all these different things. But I think it should be okay to think about these critical ideas expanding beyond what is known to be this RECE umbrella that we're holding, I guess. This idea of like, us, when we all say, us and RECE, it's interesting to think about what is this, if that makes sense. And I think why RECE still matters is that it kind of brushes up, intersects, influences things for things to create outward, if that makes sense. And so I'm always thinking about, like RECE has been a home for me, but also it has been a place of strangeness as well, if that makes sense. And in potential awkwardness when it comes to thinking about racialized identities or my queerness, and those things exist within RECE in various different ways, but I'm finding a lot of interest in different things. And so I think it's just thinking about being okay with the fluidity that's inside and outside of RECE, and not asking ourselves, what do we do to bring people in, but to be okay with our influence, and that not to draw in and capture, but to kind of be a place of like, here's what we have, and also take this match with you and ignite elsewhere, if that makes sense, and to spread these flames of curiosities into your own realms, whether it be my interest in Portuguese studies, this Chicanics kind of like world that is looking to early childhood and thinking about where does RECE, these ideas could intersect potentially, not to bring them to us, but to think about them, as they explore and outward and so forth. And so not to keep this ship a sail, but to think about where this ship could take other people to and pass on and go forth in that way. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been thinking about in relation to this matters and so forth. But thank you for that time.
Well, thank you. And thanks so much to the panel and a whole audience, that a portion of whom are misidentified as me. But we are going to now start migrating. And if you'd like to be part of the discussion, please stick around. This process we have a little smaller than some of the larger webinars that hit 300 or something, but today. But it can take 2 or 3 minutes because we want to make everyone who stays on the line a panelist. That means you can be visible, you can turn your camera on. We ask that everyone stay muted though, and put questions in the Q&A or in the chat. And while that is happening, we're going to turn it back over to Professor Tessar. And he's going to just remind you of the upcoming conference and its deadline, I think. Okay.
Absolutely, Kiara. Thank you, Beth, and thank you to all panelists. And what a wonderful set of thoughts and reflections, and something that for me really resonated with me, because it was a really demonstrated merging of scholarship and activism that RECE famous, a non-hierarchical space that we know happens 9 a.m. at the plenary and at the midnight in a RECE pub. And I think we all been missing those experiences. So it's my great pleasure and privilege to really thank colleagues at the UBC and who are so brave that they are organizing in June RECE hybrid conference from 23rd till 26th of June. And we know that not all of us will be able to travel, or will be willing to travel, or could afford to travel. And so it's wonderful to have that hybrid experience. But we also know that many of us want to travel and need to travel. And after 2 years of pandemic, they need that kind of face-to-face engagement that we've been on long for. So it's fabulous to know that Call for Papers is out there on our website. So you can go there, become a member, join RECE, download the Call for Papers, respond to it, submit your proposal. 15th of February, I cannot emphasize enough how unusual a year it is for RECE, because we will not be extending the Call for Papers. We unfortunately cannot, because otherwise we won't be able to create a program for June conference. So Namahi Noi, and thank you so much. And I know there are a lot of international colleagues here, especially from down under and elsewhere. And I just really want to encourage everybody to join the conversation in the next 20 minutes. Thank you, Kiara.
And I would direct your attention to the chat. It's very odd to be me right now and see my name all over the screen, as more of you have joined us. And so there is a way to change it back to your name that Alex has posted. So you can click the blue ellipsis icon in the upper right-hand corner and then select the rename option. So you can rename yourself.
Beth, it's not so bad to have so many of you also.
Oh, speak for yourself, Mimi. But I see Shirley Kessler's hand is up, and we'll also, Merrick and I will start monitoring the chat and the Q&A. Okay, go ahead, Shirley. Nice to see you.
Nice to see all of you too. Can you see me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I wanted to speak to a couple of topics. The first is related to the origins of RECE. And I'd like to point out that I was sitting in a class with Herbert Klebard, and he was talking about developmental theory as a source of curriculum. And I realized, along with others in the classroom, what an incorrect idea that is, that the way children develop don't tell you what to teach. And he also pointed out that with regard to developmental theory, theories do not indicate what children should become. They describe what children are like, but they leave out the important question of what is desired in children's development. And what is desired, of course, depends on many, many things. But as a source of curriculum, that must be answered in order for us to plan programs for children. It's a philosophical and ethical question that is still, to my knowledge, unfortunately, not addressed in the recent DAP documents published by NAYC. What do we want children to become? And how does that relate to what kind of a society do we want to build? And so because I realized how under-theorized child development approaches to curriculum were, I contacted Mimi and Beth and Jan Gibson and decided we have to provide a forum for these important questions to be discussed. They are not in the literature. The other thing I'd like to point out is in regard to the second and perhaps third questions regarding future desires, perhaps on the part of members of RECE. I'd like to say that we can, along with one of the panelists, forget her name, sorry, and I don't see it mentioned above, that we need to spend more time in classrooms with children. We don't know what children desire. We don't know what teachers desire. And I strongly, I can't urge this enough. I think the field has become over-theorized. It started out, the field was under-theorized. It may be that we have gone too far in the other direction. And in order to plan programs for the future, we need to talk to teachers and we need to talk to children, as one of the panelists pointed out. And only then can we set forth recommendations as a body. Years ago, a curriculum theorist at the University of Chicago, excuse me, I'm almost done, pointed out the field of curriculum in the 60s or 50s was too theorized and not in touch with the practical. And I just urge us all to spend time in classrooms. I wish I were younger. I would go into classrooms now and do research. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. That's great context and important history that time just doesn't permit to get into all the nuances of. There's a question in the chat for Jonathan, I think, and I also see Sonia's hand. Sonia Arndt in Melbourne. Go right ahead, Sonia. Join us.
Hi, everybody. Lovely to see you. I'm coming back repeatedly to the question that many of you, of the panelists, raised about finding your home and feeling the sense that we can be comfortable in the questioning, be comfortable in the advocacy, be comfortable in challenging the status quo, be kind of uprooting what we've been doing so far, or perhaps what other people are doing and thinking. My question is to any of the panelists who'd like to respond. about picking up on Dana's point on how do we bring that to teachers in the everyday? How do we allow people to access the kind of homeness that we feel, not just in our immediate place, but across the world? We're aiming to work with teachers in places that perhaps don't have access, and you did allude to it, Dana, in saying that not everybody can come to New Zealand, for example. So how do we do this in an international sense, in a global sense, when, for example, we're working in a hybrid context, or when we're teaching internationally, when we're working across the globe? I wonder if, and this includes allowing Indigenous peoples across in our localities and in other localities to have a home as well within RECE. What are your thoughts?
Can I offer just so earlier this week, we had our quick meeting to check the technology for this panel. And I had this amazing experience of Zooming with people from RECE while tucked in the corner of the early childhood library at my school. And it was just all of a sudden looking at you all and saying, oh, you're here at my school with me. It was, I wanted to keep you. I wanted to carry the computer into my classroom and introduce you to my kids. And it made me just start wondering, the Early Childhood Assembly at NCTE, the National Council for Teachers of English, they have implemented a program for several years now called Professional Dyads for Culturally Relevant Teaching. And it's pretty incredible what they're doing, partnering academics with classroom teachers, and actually those academics scholars joining the teachers and teaching in the classrooms with them. And I'm not suggesting that we do something like that, but I wonder about the potential that's offered by something like Zoom to create dyads like that, where you could connect scholars with classroom teachers, where visits might be possible. It meant those few moments meant so much to me. And I wonder, could we move towards something like that? Would that be something possible, especially given what Zoom is making possible, no matter how challenging it might be? It also opens up different opportunities.
I agree.
I think it would open up an interesting space for what I like to call reciprocal mentoring. You know, certainly breaking down the hierarchies of who are using the most theory are the most scholarly, and really shedding light on that, as Shirley inferred. Janna, you were about to speak to that. Didn't mean to step on you there.
And I'll build on what you said about mentoring. If we refer to it as mentorship instead of mentoring, maybe it's a little bit more less hierarchical in that way, because then it's not one way or the other way. We can say we're in a relationship, a mentorship. And I think what Dana is saying makes a lot of sense to me. I don't even know what time it is. I feel very present with you all today. And I know this takes an incredible amount of work behind the scenes, and thank you to the support team at ASU, and also Bobbi and Mark and everyone in the committee. But this is creating such a beautiful space for us all. And when I said that I worry about children's futures, I'm thinking about the cost of my travel to their futures. And so is it even responsible of me? I would love to go to New Zealand, please, thank you. But is it even responsible of me to go there when what I'm doing is trying to work for more sustainable, just, equitable, safe futures for children? And so I do feel very grateful for this opportunity to see so many Beth's faces now that you've all renamed yourselves and be with you all today. And I'm grateful for this invitation to be here. And I think Dana's right on that. You're in my school with me too. This is my brand new office and my dream job. And it's wonderful to see people who I've met in other spaces, but feel like I'm planted and grounded here as well.
The question that is in the chat appreciates Jonathan's remarks and raises the question: should we be improving / fostering emotional intelligence of our students, or should we actually, or first primarily, be improving emotional intelligence in our teachers? I don't know, Jonathan, if you wanted to have a go at that question or can see it in the chat.
I'll have a go at it. Emotional intelligence is not one of my phrases particularly. What I would say, though, in general, is you can't do one without the other. I mean, if you're talking about some kind of initiative with children, you also have to be working with adults at the same time. And in fact, you probably have to be working with adults first in order to create a community in a school that is interested in some kind of change. So I think the questions about school change are about school change, and I think the school change thing has to work with adults first, and then with children, but certainly both. So it's certainly not either or. Yeah, I know that emotional intelligence is a current or was a current phrase, but I'm not. It makes me a little nervous.
And I would bring everyone's attention to something that Lacey Peters, Hunter College in New York City, just posted that we have a Padlet set up, and she's posted a link. If there are further comments you'd like to add, it sort of is the culmination of the 30-year celebration that we engaged starting last September, and it will go on, but concluding it in some ways today. It was just a way that people could share, as panelists have today, their relationships. And I noticed that Gail Bolt commented that to Sonia's point, that we are yearning for and wanting to connect with global voices and friendships that span continents, communities, and countries, certainly national boundaries. And so we're doing a hybrid conference. I mean, that is being on the steering committee for several years now, and treasurer of the organization and so forth, kind of embedded, particularly in names today. I don't know how that happened, but yeah, I'm very glad that we are looking at that as a steering committee. By the way, the cost to the planet and the very futures of those we say we're advocating for and with and listening to, when we have, big footprints to get to our conferences, and making these hybrid spaces available seems very important. Mimi, go ahead. I see your hand.
Well, I see that our time is going, so I'm going to just ask. We did have a series of webinars. Janna helped with them for such a long time, and some were topic oriented. They were quite well attended, and then Dana had the other idea of having ways to come into classrooms with different kinds of relationships and dyadic or other kinds of ways of using Zoom. And I wondered if, because of the global footprint of traveling and all of that, I wondered how well doing more, I hate to say it, more webinars or more topic oriented, or it seemed when we asked people to do these things that many of the people in the RECE community have responded gladly without any pay, no other motivation but to share their ideas, I believe. And I'm so pleased that that happened. But I wondered if, not that people need more webinars, but if focused issues might be addressed that through other Zoom-oriented webinars. Would that be, for those listening, would that be something that would be welcome? These are all free and done by a panel that we could organize responding to different issues. So does anybody have a response who's listening? Are there things that you'd like RECE to be able to do or to do?
In the meantime, thanks, Gail, for posting that link to the trauma-based and social emotional learning programs resource. Much appreciated. That's been another tradition in RECE that really didn't get named, and so I'll say it right now, a psychoanalytic tradition. And Michael and Gail and many others have pursued that work. So that should be named, just in terms of this sort of self-proclaimed legacy celebration we seem to be having today, and as well as future imaginaries, which are so important.
I would just like to respond to Mimi's question and provocation. I think that it's fair to say that we've had a good run of 30 years of face-to-face engagements and conferences, but it seems that in a current environment and made us really rethink. And it was actually before pandemic, but Thomas, who is here on a call from Denmark, who organized our Copenhagen conference, it's been really challenging and is asking us, how do we make our engagement and conferences more equitable? Whether we really do need to travel everyone all around the world, and whether there are other ways how to engage. And as a steering committee, we do hear both of those voices of people who really do want to connect and spend time together, and of those who really cannot afford, or simply it is really difficult for them to do so. So we do think that as a RECE, we will continue in a hybrid mode. We will continue with face-to-face engagements and conferences, but also with those with the webinars like these, because these webinars are not only for those who can attend at this particular time zone, but they are being recorded, posted on our website. It's becoming a resource for people to go back to and to watch those panelists. We know that the one that Gail Bold has moderated, the very first 30th anniversary one, it's been already shared through a number of courses and it's been used as an example of really critical conversation. And we really hope we're gonna create these kind of opportunities for all RECE members, and I emphasize members because we all want you to join RECE and become members, to participate and to engage in these critical conversations.
I'd like to say, can I say something about membership here? The membership is a very tiny amount of money, and it helps to sustain the organization. And so it's not it's a tiny amount of money, relatively speaking. It helps to keep the background going, the facilitation of the webinars, for example, the technology part. And really for this, you get to join the community. You get to sort of formally support, almost like a charitable contribution, the sustenance of the long-term community. And I think it's something like $25 to $35. Mark, am I right? Something. Anyway, you get, and the rest of everything that we do is free. So I'll just say that.
And we will be saving the chat and considering ideas if we're running out of time right now. But very interesting, now that we have around 1,000 Twitter followers, and of course we have what is it, Mimi, 1,500? We have a closed Facebook. We debated making that open, but we're getting out there a little more on social media. And there's an interesting suggestion by somebody who is misnamed as me, that when there's a moralistic, panic-stoking tweet about millennials leaving the workforce, perhaps RECE or individually, collectively, could quote, tweet, and link to that neoliberal subject formation, etc., that infers the progress of children in childhood, just as perhaps one day to use social media to keep RECE ideas more lively. We're trying to do that. Bobbi's work has really grown. Initially Janna's and more recently Bobbi's work to get our Twitter up and regularly updated. So I think there are openings to do creative things that more enter the public discourse. Horrifying as it is most days, I would speak for myself on that. But we thank you. We're drawing to the end of our time together. We remind you when we say 15th February. I guess that would be 16th February in several of your nations in Australasia. But we are serious about that deadline. We're having to hold a number of rooms. For the first time, we're kind of signing a contract that has some financial implications, said your treasurer with a smile. So we want to be able to notify people very quickly. Are you on the program? And then pose the question, and how realistic is it you would come and be with us in person again? So thanks to everyone on the panel. Thank you for being part of this. And we'll say goodbye for now, but see you on Twitter and other social media. Bye.